Let's go JavaScripting! Hi everybody and welcome to another exciting edition of Boring JavaScript. I'm your host, the Virtuoid, aka Mike Smith, and today we're taking a look at the reflect object. Yes, we're going to take an object and we're going to reflect upon it. We're going to reflect upon the values of its properties. We're going to reflect upon the inner workings and find out the soul of an object. Which basically means we're going to take an object and we're going to look into the internals of the object to find out what it took to make up that object. Plus, we're going to show you a couple little fancy things you can do with this reflect object. You want to see how it works? Let's get started. Now, using reflect object is really simple. There's two things you need to know about. First of all, here is the actual line in which we can use the reflect object. The reflect object is something that when you use, you don't use it as if it's a constructor. So you don't say new reflect or anything like that. Everything that you have off the reflect object are static methods. So we will say reflect get, reflect has, reflect this, reflect that, reflect whatever. That's the first requirement. You can't say new reflect. It's reflect dot whatever. The second thing is that the first argument that is passed to the reflect always must be an object. If you're familiar with some of the older ways of doing object stuff, that's a good way of putting it. Objects, like things like object get, get properties and things like that. You'll notice that reflect does a lot of the same things that objects, but objects will coerce variables into objects. Well, reflect, you have to always have an object. So you'll notice I have a my cat here that is an object. If I was to put a number 1 here or some sort of primitive value, it will give a type error. So basically, depending upon what property you're using, the reflect arguments you put to reflect, or excuse me, depending upon what kind of method you're going to be using, the arguments you put to reflect will have 1, 2, 3, sometimes even more arguments. And we're just going to go through a couple of different static methods you can do on the reflect to be able to get some interesting information from your particular object. The first one we're going to take a look at here is reflect get. And reflect get gets the value of a particular property on an object. So in this case, the first argument is the object itself. And in fact, all of these, the first argument is always the object. And the second argument is the property name. So if I say reflect get my cat property name, I should expect the property name to get, or should expect it to reflect into the object my cat and get the name property, which in this case Fluffy. So if I was to run this now, let's go ahead and go into Node and let's type in node get. Yep, I got Fluffy. So what's the difference between doing that and doing this? Console.log my cat.name. What's the difference? Well, absolutely nothing. Does the exact same thing. So why would you want to use get? Aha, that's in the third segment of our video. I'll show you why you would want to use something like get. But anyway, that's one of the things you can do with reflect. But there's a couple of other things you can do with reflect. Now let's bring up that code here real quick. One of the other things is you can find out if a particular object has a particular property to it. So for instance, that's with the has method. So for instance, I will have my cat here as my object and I will pass to it a property key called legs. And so what it will do is it will take a look into my cat object, it will reflect into it, and it will say, okay, do you have the property legs? Yes or no. Has returns a Boolean true or Boolean false. Now as you can tell here, there is no legs. So if I now flip over, save it, if I flip over to node, let's clear off the screen. Let's go node get. Aha, notice it said false. Well, what happens if I turn it to a one that we know is there, like type. We know type is there, and I'm not going to change the variable name or anything like that. If we flip over to node, yep, now it says it's true. So you can use the has, reflection of the has, to be able to find out if a particular object has a particular property. Another one you can do here, which is really cute, is the own keys. And the own keys is really nice in that it will list out all the different keys for your particular object. So if I was to do own keys onto the object my cat, it will reflect itself into my cat and say, hey, give me your keys. In this case, you should give name, type, and classification. And so if I do now console.log on my cat keys, I should get the array of my keys. So let's go over to node. Let's clear off the screen. Go to get. And yep, those are my keys. But now what's really interesting about this is that there is actually an object property saying get own property names or something like that, that will allow you to get the names of the properties, but it only gets you the property names. It doesn't get you symbols or anything like that, while the reflect one actually will. So if I was to add a symbol to my cat, not only will it pick up the name, type, and classification, but it will also pick up the symbol tail. So if we save this and flip over to node, we'll just run it here, won't clear off the screen. Aha, see, it even got the symbol. So if you were to use the object versions of this, which is get own symbol keys or get own property keys, you had to do different operations to get both the symbols and for the properties. But this one with reflect, it gets them all, both the names and the symbols themselves. One other thing you can do, which I think is really, really fun here, is that you can sit here and now get how a particular a property within the object was built. So in this case, it's called get own property descriptor. And you pass it again, the object itself, and the property key that you want to inspect. And it will tell you exactly how that particular property was built. So if we now go to node, let's clear off the screen, we go to node get. We know now that was it type that we had? Let me check that real quick. Yeah, it was type. We used type. The type had a value of cat. We know that it's writable, so we can change it. It is enumerable, which means it will get listed, and it is configurable, which means again it can be reconfigured within the property itself. So these are some of the things that you can get with the reflect. You can really drill down to each one of these particular properties and get all the kind of information you want to do. You want for it. There's also a couple of things that you can do with it to actually change how the object behaves. I'll show you that next. Okay, so now let's take a look at the reflect and see how it can actually change the behavior of your particular object. I have an object here, and I'm just doing a console.log in the object, and this is just a simple, my cat. And so, your corporation is sitting there writing reports all day long on your cat, and that's the data it always gets is name, type, classification. Everybody's nice and happy. And then somebody comes along and does this. My cat.ugly equals true. Ha ha ha. Very ha ha funny. You come in the next morning, you do node prevent, and oh no, the cat is ugly. What are we going to do? Well, of course, you go back to the programmer, beat the person up like you wouldn't believe, and then you delete the code. But how are you going to prevent it from occurring in the future? Well, you use reflection. And specifically, a reflection called reflect prevent extensions. And what that does is whatever object you pass to it, which in this case is my cat, it's going to prevent anybody from adding any kind of new property to that particular object. So now you load in my cat, you do prevent extensions, and the guy comes back in a little bit later and says, I'm going to do my cat is ugly again. So they do that again, but you run that report and ugly does not appear anymore. And the reason it does not appear is because we have taken the reflection and prevented any kind of extensions. One thing to do realize though, once you prevent extensions, you can never unprevent. It's gone. It will not allow you to do it ever. So there's no unprevent extensions or anything like that type command. Now although it doesn't allow you to have extensions, it does allow you to change the data. So I'm going to change the data to the cat from Fluffy to Hope. Hope actually happens to be the name of my cat I used to have many, many, many years ago. And so now if we do no prevent, yep, there it is. The name is now Hope. So prevent extensions does not allow, it allows you to change properties, but it does not allow you to add anything extra to them. Now, if you recall correctly, let's go back to our get that we did in our earlier one. We did a reflect get on property descriptor. And when we did that, it gave us a report that looked like this. Value, writable, enumerable, and configurable. These are different attributes of that particular property within the object. Well, you can use reflection and all of those attributes to really fine-tune how you're going to be able to create a particular object or a particular property on your object, and that is called the define property. So let's pop this code inside here. Define property is real simple. Again, we pass it the object like we always do. This is going to be the new property key. In this case, this is going to be the key that's going to create. So it's going to create tail in addition to name, type, classification. And I'm going to set it with the default or the initial value of true. And this value matches the value in the attribute that you see here on the, where we did the property descriptor from the previous one. So if we go here, we're going to do define property. So when we do a console.log for my cat, we should see name, type, classification, and now tail. Let's do a clear screen. Let's do node prevent. And oh no, what happened? We got name, type, classification, but what about tail? Well, did it actually do it? Well, let's find out. Console.log my cat.tail. Did I spell it? Yep. All right, let's save it. Let's flip back over to node. Let's do a node prevent. Yeah, it actually said it. So what happened? Well, that's one of the great uses of, let's go over to the get own property descriptor, is now we can now delve deep into this new tail that we created and find out exactly what happened. So let's console.log that and see what went wrong. We go console.log, reflect, get own property descriptor. That'd be for my cat. Whoops, my cat tail. Now we're going to hopefully see what exactly happened. Let's go over to node. Aha! It is not writable, it is not enumerable, and it is not configurable by default. So if you're going to use define property, you're going to need to specify all this information here to make it to any way you want it to be, to make it the way you need it to be. And we're going to need it to be enumerable, so let's make it enumerable. Let's flip back over to our code, and let's pop it inside here, and make it true. So now it should appear within this console.log. Let's save it. Let's flip back over to node. We'll clear our screen off this time. We'll go to prevent. And yeah, there it is. It now appears. And why does it appear? It appears because we now told it that it's going to be enumerable up here. So define property is a wonderful little property or a little method here that you can use to really get a fine grade definition of a property on an object. Now earlier I told you when we did our first thing here that, I used get to be able to get a value, and I told you there's no difference between just using regular get, but there's a really good way of use or a good use case for using get. I'm going to show you that next. So what exactly is reflect.get good for? Well, if you watched my video from last week's Boring JavaScript series, that was on proxies. And one of the great things about proxies is that you can take a proxy and it will intercept any kind of information that is requested or asked for from a particular object. So for instance, if you had an object that, well, for instance, let's just flip over to our original code here for prevent here. We have our code for constant my cat. I have 3 properties here. If I had a property that came out and said, console.log my cat.tail, for example, that is a get operation. And it will go out and get the information from my tail. But when you have a proxy says, oh, hold on, I'm going to intercept that get and I'm going to do something funky and familiar, something really weird with it. And then before I let the original object take care of it. So that's what a proxy basically does. And again, watch the video if you want to learn more about proxies. So in this particular case here, I've defined a proxy for get. And this is basically the way that a variable, a property is gotten from an object. And all I'm saying here is that if the property name is equal to, if the property is equal to name, I want to change it to uppercase. Otherwise, I'm going to use a reflect.get and pass all the arguments over to the reflect. Because I don't know, I know that the property name is not name, it's got to be something else, so it could be any number of names because I don't fully know what property I may have a handle on here. Well, in this case I do, but you could design a proxy where, it could be any number of different handlers to any different objects. So if you are not having to do something special with a particular property, you need to be able to pass all that information back to the original object. And the best way to do it is using a reflect. In fact, if you look at the proxies have gets and sets and has and own keys and all the things we just looked at here for reflect. Proxies have that too. So the key here is that reflects were developed about at the same time as proxies were, to be able to, when you build the proxy, to be able to immediately reflect upon the original object and get whatever information or set whatever information is available to that particular object. So that's one of the most wonderful things that reflect is great for. Reflect.get in this case, or even the reflect.own keys or the has or anything like that. In conjunction with proxies, it's a very powerful way of being able to pass data straight to the original object and bypass the proxy if necessary. So this is one of the great things you can use the reflect.get for. And that's all there is to using the reflect object. I hope you enjoyed our video. Hope I didn't bore you to death. Make sure you click on the like button below if you like this video, or click on the subscribe button to subscribe to this wonderful channel. You can also go to www.boringjavascript.com to see all of our videos, or www.thevirtualwhite.com to see everything that we do. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you later.